Today we continue our exposition of the book of Romans. What I intend to achieve today, though, is to try and contextualize verse 4. In the last few days, I have labored the point of Jesus as the son of David and Jesus as the root of David. Verse 3 talks about Jesus being born of the seed of David according to the flesh. And in verse 4, it talks about Jesus as the Lord of David, he who was declared to be the Son of God with power, according to the Spirit of holiness, by the resurrection from the dead. In the last few days, I have really tried to focus on the meaning of the resurrection and the value of the resurrection for the believer, knowing well, as Jesus would say, that he who believes in the Son is not condemned. John chapter 3 verse 17. But he goes on to say that he who does not believe in the Son of God, he who perhaps holds only that Jesus is a prophet or a good teacher, and yet does not believe that Jesus is the Son of God, who was declared to be the Son of God with power, according to the Spirit of holiness, by the resurrection from the dead. He who does not believe in the remission of sins by the perfect Son of God is condemned already. And later on, Jesus would say that he who has the Son has life. He who does not have the Son does not have life, but the wrath of God abides on them. Beloved, I would like us to see the importance of this doctrine, the importance of believing in Jesus, the Son of God, Jesus, the risen one. For if we do not believe in Jesus as the Son of God, it is impossible for us to believe in the resurrection. If we do not believe in the resurrection, it follows clearly that we have no understanding of the destructive nature, the radical nature of the fall, and the fact that those who do not believe in the Son of God, they are under the wrath of God. And that on the judgment day, on the final day, they have no place for cover. They have no refuge. They are exposed before the righteous wrath of God. And so the context of what I have been saying in the last few days, it is not so that we detour and talk about the deity of Christ, but it is so that we see here, as Paul began by saying, that this gospel concerns Jesus Christ. When we go to preach the gospel, we proclaim the gospel with Jesus as the content, with Jesus as the Son of Man born of a virgin, that he lived a holy life. We go on, however, to proclaim that this Jesus who was crucified by men under the guidance of God himself, that he is the Son of God, and that by and in believing in him, we find everlasting life, that there is no other mediator between God and man. He is the only mediator. He is God's idea. He is God's chosen mediator, God's chosen attorney. And if we do not have him as our attorney, Scripture is clear, we shall have Christ as our judge. And so if you are a minister of the gospel, whether from a platform or whether you are doing one-on-one evangelism, I would like you to see here that the gospel that we preach is not about good words for living. It's not about wisdom for living, as important as that could be in a sense. But when we proclaim the gospel, what is at stake is not people's finances. What is at stake is not even their health. What is at stake is the eternity of their souls. And much as we might proclaim to them about breakthroughs, much about healing that we might proclaim to them, the reality is that if their souls are not subject to Jesus Christ, and if they do not remind themselves every day of the dangers of going to the brink of eternity without Christ, they are lost forever. We therefore proclaim Christ to everyone. We proclaim Christ as the content of the gospel. We tell them that Jesus is the Son of God who lived perfectly as human in this world. And by that virtue, he qualified as a mediator. It was not possible, Peter tells us in the book of Acts, for death to continue holding on to him. And because he was perfect, death had no authority over him. Therefore, John tells us in the book of Revelation that he has the keys of death and Hades, that he has authority over what death would do to any son of Adam. But in his wisdom, he has determined that those who have not put their faith in him, that they will be locked in that prison of death, that prison of separation from God, that prison of torture and torment and God's judgment forever and ever. And so this is not a trivial matter, dear beloved. Our own souls, we must apply them to this teaching. We must recognize the seriousness of eternity, the seriousness of the wrath of God on any person who does not believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God, and then proclaim that as the gospel. Anything else that does not focus on our sin, that does not focus on how far we've fallen, how far our generation has fallen from God, and the call to God through the only mediator that is appointed by God himself. If we do not proclaim that as the content of our gospel, we do not preach the gospel. Paul says in the book of Corinthians that the enemy tries to deceive some from the simplicity of the gospel. And so in our times today, we are so focused on either simplifying the gospel, we're trying to make the gospel sound pleasing, and to scratch the itchy ears of our hearers and our audiences. And as John Chrysostom would say, that then our preaching sounds like music to their ears, but it does not pierce to their souls and call them for the forgiveness of sins. And those who have been forgiven, for them to ensure that they make their election sure, and to make sure that their souls are fully surrendered to God, and to make sure that they have received the forgiveness of sins, and they reach out to others with diligence. And so ministers of the gospel must proclaim the gospel, because what Paul is saying from the beginning of chapter 1 verse 1 is that this gospel does not belong to any one of us. It is greater than any message of any president or king. It is a message that belongs to the King of Kings, our Creator, in whom we have life, in whom we have breath, and in whom we have all things. That God has given us a very specific message. We do not make it up as we go along. We do not invent it or innovate new ways of communicating the gospel. That gospel belongs to him, the message of God, and the content he has also given. It concerns Jesus Christ, his Son. It concerns his humanity. The fact that Jesus was declared to be the Son of God also, according to the Spirit of holiness, and therefore it concerns his deity. So in summary, that's the gospel. We must proclaim the gospel, not our versions of the gospel, not to twist and change it to suit our audience of our time, but to proclaim the gospel, to maintain its purity, to defend the purity of the gospel, and never to change it to suit our own ideas or audiences or cultures or languages as it would be. That we would stay true to this gospel that was once delivered to us, to declare Christ and to set him forth before the souls of men, for only in him will they find everlasting life.